Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm struggling with my tongue this morning as I'm waking up. So, welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast, and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies overall, focus in on their people, process, and technology, as well as the strategy inside of the organization. We're holding a weekly series right now. You can see the address to sign up for the series. It's called Thoughts at Scale. The whole idea is to provide companies ways to think about things that they need to improve as they scale. So as the organization scale. And so, we focus on topics, all across our industry. Today's topic actually focuses in on metrics. And so we're going to, deep dive metrics, which is tied in actually to the topic of this particular podcast. And so with that, why don't I bring in our guest? So in this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is Dr. Vibhor Gupta. Dr. Gupta is the director and founder of PangaeaData. He trained in oncology research and has a breadth of experience in life science as well. And so I'm looking forward to diving deeply into your background and the things that you've done. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here, Don, and thank you very much for the opportunity. And please call me Vibhor.
Thank you very much. So Vibhor, could you just give us a brief overview of your journey in the life sciences industry, and what sort of brought you here? What made you want to focus on life sciences?
Yes, so I trained in oncology research, as you mentioned, which meant I was getting trained in biology and medicine. And back in my second year, at when I was doing my internship in the med school, my boss, who was a professor in bacteriology, told me if I ever wanted to do anything meaningful in science and medicine, I had to learn how to code, meaning code in computer programs. Back in the day, this domain of medicine and computing was called bioinformatics. Yes, we have the same semantics today, but the term means very different today, I might add. I'm going back 22 years, more than 2 decades ago. And what it really meant then was to use your scientific knowledge along with skills involving computational programming and statistical analysis to make sense of medical data that you were working with in the context of improving patient outcomes and understanding their journey, but also in the context of scientific R&D. So we are talking 2001 here, 2002, and the human genome had just been sequenced. So, of course, it was a big development in science and medicine. And given everything I've just said, we were very excited. And, and as I got into coding, I understood the potential of how these two domains come together and what value they can bring together, both for clinicians in practice, but also scientific researchers. And fast forward 20 years or so, here I am, very much motivated, perhaps a lot more than I was back then, with some, success stories under our belt, but also with a lot of learning. And I have to say, if I talk to any young students, I always share these success stories and these learnings because I feel this particular domain has immense potential in the future. And perhaps we will talk more about that as we go along.
Yeah, I always am interested as well, not just in the journey that people took, but in those additional lessons that we all learn, because I feel like there's a lot of benefit, that other people can take as well. Would you mind sharing some of the things that you learned along the way?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I mean, the first things, let's break it down, right? I mean, you learn at several levels. So, the first thing that you learn about is how, what is your motivation to do this? Is the motivation to do this based on, your interest in science and technology at an academic level? Is your motivation to do this because you actually see how it translates in the real world, for you, in the clinic or in research, and also for patients, who you are looking to treat and help? Or is the motivation purely based on, the aspect of, how the creative aspect of how this could help the community at large, and advance your knowledge? And all those three motivations are not, mutually exclusive, as you can
Mm.
appreciate. But you have to focus on one, right? Because only then can you chart your journey going forward. So one of the things I learned, and I continue to learn, in fact, through my colleagues, and my mentors, who are senior academics, professors, or entrepreneurs, is that you don't have to make a choice amongst these different motivations, but you certainly have to keep them in mind, because as you progress, as you make progress, and I've seen this firsthand, there will be several blocks along the way, right? It is not easy. Things do become challenging, sometimes more challenging than you would like, sometimes for longer than you would like. And therefore, keeping these motivations and these principles in mind are very important, because that's what keeps you going. And it's very, yes, based on whatever evidence you have, and based on what everyone else around you is doing, you will have a reasonable proxy for timescales, and investment needed, and all the rest of it, and the types of resources you need. But those are proxies, right? And they change, and several other variables change. So I guess, in a very long-winded way, what I'm trying to say is, your motivations should be very clear. Keep them close to your heart and mind, and yes, they will allow you to focus, and at the same time, they will allow you to weather the storms as they come along your way. So that was the number one thing I learned, from an emotional standpoint. uh, you know uh, from a very pragmatic standpoint, and this is very important, you have to break it up, right?
Hmm.
You have to break up your journey, so in the sense that, yes, you've got the big picture in mind, but you really have to decide for yourself, okay, how am I going to realize this big picture, right? And what steps do I need to take along the way, and what milestones I need to achieve? Now, you're never going to be right at the start. You're never going to be right even if you're midway. But that's the whole nature of this, right? You've got to make some assumptions, and based on those assumptions, and based on feedback around those assumptions from people around you, you just have to carry on. So one of the best learnings I had, was how do you break up your journey and decide on those milestones and those deliverables to make it quite concrete, both for yourself and people who are advising you, because it really helps you then measure your success, or progress. Let's put it that way, and then iterate on it and adapt, right? So that was very, very important. And perhaps you might be thinking, this is quite obvious, but you'll be surprised how often we make the mistake of getting distracted, and not having measurable deliverables. We assign ourselves deliverables sometimes based on, hey, that is achievable, so let's do that, as opposed to saying, actually, that's what we need to do to get to where we want to get to. So I think that was something, from a pragmatic perspective, I learned, and it is very important. And the third thing I would say, which is very, very important, I've alluded to, is your team.
Mm,
people around you. Right? You have to really focus on exactly what you're looking to do, and in the context of what you're looking to do, what kind of expertise you need around yourself. Because once you have at least that clarity to a reasonable extent, you are able to get the right people on board. There are lots of very intelligent, talented folks, around you, and it will be, there's a lot to learn from them, and equally it'll be fun working with them. But if you are not clear of where you're going, and if you are not clear of what you're trying to achieve, and if your motivation is not clear, back to my first 2 points, then it's very hard to motivate and give that clarity of thought to your colleagues, right? And this works both for colleagues who will be working with you on a daily basis, and also your mentors and advisors, right? Because they wouldn't know what to work with you on or to advise you on, right?
right.
Until you're clear with them as to what you actually want to do. So I think having that right set of people and having that clarity about who you need is very important. Now, finding them is a whole different ballgame. Yes, if you need certain kinds of experts and people with certain kinds of experiences, you might not be able to access that right off the bat. And finding them and how you get to them, that's a tactical thing, right? But at a very fundamental level, you at least need to know who you want by your side. So I guess, just to summarize, have a very clear motivation to get you out of bed every morning and to do what you want to do. uh, Break down your journey, have at least a clearer sight of what you want, how you're going to get there. And number three, make sure you know what you want in order to get there, based on whatever knowledge you have acquired in terms of team and expertise you need around you.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of the points that you just covered as well that I feel like a lot of people, I mean, one, looking at people from the outside, oftentimes people focus on, the overnight successes, right? The fact that, somebody just all of a sudden seems to arrived into your space and seems very successful. Well, that individual has done a lot of individual work, and they've also done a lot of, introspection in terms of, where their gaps are, and then also, bringing along people in their journey that as well. I feel like, um and it's so easy to look at people and go, oh well, this person has or has done, a lot more than I particularly have. But you have to also understand their journey was probably one, you know where they did a lot of this work and was very focused, not just by their motivation, but as well in terms of, their destination. They knew where they wanted to go. And then lastly, the part that you're talking about in terms of the team, it's funny. I've had so many conversations with organizations that are smaller in our space, which kind of goes back to the thoughts at scale, discussion that I started with, as I kicked off the podcast. Roles and responsibilities is something that we touched on, a few uh, sessions ago. And in that session, I talked about the idea of not just hiring for a job, which we could get too focused on the job description. Instead, focus much more on the skills that you need, and that will bring you to this point of, really understanding how to fill in the gaps and and bring people along. Like you said, it can become a tactical exercise where I'm hiring a data scientist, and that's what I need. But at the same time, do you need a data scientist that has a certain level of experience as well, is probably much more important to answer for any organization.
Exactly. Exactly. No, I mean, look, I mean, from personal experience, when I was in my early years, I of course built a very good knowledge base of both biology and computer sciences. But truth be told, how that was applied in the real world, when we were, for example, conducting clinical research through clinical trials or drug discovery research in the lab, was something that I was completely unfamiliar with. And but it was important for me to understand those aspects, in the context again of the big picture, which I wanted to paint. And therefore, when I went to my boss at the time, who I really wanted to work with, I was quite honest in sharing where my skills and expertise were
Mm.
and where the gaps were. And that was one thing I at least was told that made them convince them to bring me on board because they had, of course, those skills where they could help me fill the gaps, and equally they had a need around the skill set that I was coming with, which could help them as well. So it was a mutually beneficial relationship in that part, which of course both parties had a lot to benefit from, but equally had a lot to gain from at a very tactical level. But at a
Hmm.
motivational level, because both were pursuing a common interest and a goal, it was a good fit. Because you knew that you were, the very nature of research is that you are going into uncharted territory. So because the motivation was aligned, it allowed you to again work hard at it for whatever 5 6 years, and actually get to somewhere, which would progress the understanding of that particular domain we were working in for everyone involved. So,
So
yeah.
let's talk a little bit about your career. There are a couple of places I'd like to stop along the way. So one of them is, could you talk a little bit about the highlights and challenges that you experienced at Quantum Secure?
Yes, so Quantum Secure was the first startup experience for me. This company was founded in San Jose, in California. I was the first hire out of London in the UK, and fresh out of my PhD and then my postdoc. It was an opportunity that came to me, and the founders suggested that I would be quite useful for them from a product perspective, given my technical background. And I lapped it up with both hands because the fascination of being in Silicon Valley and being involved in with serial founders on a new journey was quite attractive to me back then. And when I joined them, I have to say, within the first 2 months, I realized we were not doing anything with regards to my technical skills.
Hmm.
But we just had to do a lot of thinking around product management from a sales perspective, actually, which was very interesting because I had neither done product management or sales ever. I had no formal business training in that regard or any other kind of management training. So that was interesting, and it was a very steep learning curve, as you might imagine. But again, I come back to that motivational piece because I really wanted to do it, and it was something that was important for me to learn in order to get to where I wanted to get to. It kept me focused, and then the fact that I was actually working with a group who had built businesses before and had done so ably, and a very talented team of engineers who really knew what they were doing. It allowed me that opportunity to learn on the go. And while I was making mistakes, which I must say were many, to be able to learn from them and adapt, and mitigate any risks that arose from it. And finally, I would just say because we were working in the real world with customers, with organizations who were wanting to deploy the product and benefit from it, it allowed me the very valuable lesson of understanding how customers think,
Mm.
and how customers buy what a novel or an innovative product which you're bringing to the market, and what goes on in their organization and in their world when they have to stick their necks out for something novel and innovative, and how important it is for them to make it work. So those were some very valuable lessons, and Quantum Secure was a great experience. I was with this business for almost 7 years, so it all the way from its early inception to its acquisition, and everything in between.
And then you were at Seven Bridges Genomics, is that right? Next.
That's right. And Seven Bridges Genomics was founded by a group of experts from Harvard.
Mm.
And I had come to know of them from my network within MIT and Harvard. And it was my route back into life sciences and technology, because with quantum, the focus was largely on the technology aspect. And so when Quantum Secure was acquired, I had the opportunity to join Seven Bridges as their senior vice president for sales and strategy this time. So building onto my commercial experience, because as you can appreciate in any business, they needed somebody with the scientific and commercial experience. And there I was, and yeah, the focus very much was that there is some interesting science that has been done within the business and within the lab. Now they're commercializing it. They and they are looking to see how they can commercialize it at scale. And then of course the idea was, how can you understand the usefulness and the value of this technology that they have built for their end users, and going through the paces of defining that value proposition, communicating that value proposition to prospective customers, and scaling up the business, which involved also scaling up the team.
It seems like a lot of these experiences then lead us back to Pangea Data and what you're working on now as well. I mean, a lot of these skills that you're collecting along the way then add to where you are right now. So I guess how has your journey helped you um, overall with where you are in terms of this company?
No, you're quite right. And this is why I was saying, if I had to share the roadmap that I had defined several years ago, in that roadmap, of course, it was very important for me to acquire skills to be able to understand research uh, at a scientific and a technical level, and understand commerce, as to how to commercialize research and uh, deploy it in the real world. So actually, people can benefit from it, and it can be applied in the context of products or services. So I think these experiences helped me achieve both those things. And at Pangea, our mission has always been, uh, to help improve patient outcomes in a financially sustainable manner. And let me break it down. This journey really began all those years ago when I was in my undergrad, where I could see that we were learning a lot of facts, medical facts, right? Which is what you do. And you were learning a lot of, biological facts, and you were also learning about computer programming and building new tools and methods. And the question always, at least in my mind, was, okay, you're doing a lot of this work, but how does this translate to a patient being, leading a better life? uh, you know uh, does this really make an impact at that point? And if you work backwards from that final objective of how does this benefit a patient, you say, how does this change the interaction between a clinician and a patient? Does all this technology is going to help clinicians being able to understand the patients better? Is the technology going to be able to help patients share more with their clinicians more proactively, right? And so on and so forth. And one of the things that always was in my mind was that a lot of technology and infrastructure was attracting investment, and we had a host of electronic health record systems coming on the scene at the time. We had a lot of analytical tools coming on at the time to look at patient data and predict diagnosis, or provide analysis around in the context of epidemiological studies and so on and so forth. But when it came to actually understanding how does it truly make a difference in a patient's life, the evidence around that was quite slim. So and the argument always was, well, we do need these systems in place to actually capture the data, in the first place. We do need these analytical tools in place to understand how all of this data, what is all of this data telling us. And that was all very well and good from a research standpoint. But of course, it was quite limiting, or at least the evidence was quite limiting in terms of how this all improved patient outcomes. And the argument against that was, well, we need more resources and funding. So when we founded Pangea, we said, okay, with everything ongoing right now, and all the funding available and the resources available right now, how can we make the best use of that to truly improve patient outcomes? And with that big picture in mind, again, we worked backwards from it, and we said, okay, the first milestone we would love to attain is, let's try and improve patient outcomes in the population of patients who are being missed in clinical care. So these are undiagnosed patients. And we know from medicine that there are about 7,000 hard to diagnose conditions, across which there are about 90% patients who are undiagnosed. Now, that is a serious, that is a serious, concern in healthcare, right? Because, of course, in healthcare, that means that there's a large proportion of patients who are not receiving the care that could benefit them, right? Which means that they would report at some point later in their lives with worsening outcomes or with worsening conditions, which would add to the burden of healthcare providers themselves, and more treatment costs, right? Uh, but equally, for patients, it meant poorer outcomes, right? In spite of all of this data being captured for them by virtue of electronic health record systems, mobile applications, and so on and so forth. And more importantly, this was also a big limitation for pharmaceutical companies, right? Because pharmaceutical companies, that means there is a large population of patients who are not benefiting from the drugs they already have on the market, right?
Right.
Or there's a large portion of patients who are not benefiting from the trials that they're running, who could benefit them. So we said, okay, let's look at this undiagnosed population first and see if we can make a difference there with all that is available today. And using again our clinical, technical, and business knowledge, we started off within Pangea to provide a product platform which allowed clinicians in both healthcare and in pharmaceutical companies to find more of these undiagnosed patients based on their records and based on current clinical guidelines that a clinician would uh, follow manually today in the clinic, so that these patients could be brought into care. And we have some success stories in that regard, which is very fulfilling, because it actually showed how these patients could be found, and most importantly, could be found in a privacy preserving manner without the need for any data changing hands, or any privacy regulation being compromised. And finally, as I started off, we wanted to do all of this in a financially sustainable manner, and we now have proven, through these success stories, how this could be done in a financially sustainable manner and a more replicable manner. So the patients benefit, because they are highly motivated to know earlier on if they are undiagnosed for something before their condition worsens. So the clinicians benefit, so they're able to treat more patients and effectively triage them and improve outcomes. And the pharmaceutical companies benefit, because now they're able to offer their therapies that are already there on the market, or connect these patients to trials that they might be running, without having to go around and manually approach each healthcare provider and clinician to do the same.
Yeah, I mean, so many things came to mind through that as well. Because I mean, like you said, one of the key things that I started thinking about was, um, just how do you do this in a world where you have, all of these data privacy, um, challenges as well to deal with. We couldn't have been an easy journey for you either, in terms of, saying, hey, look, if we had this information, we could actually benefit people. And on the other side, there are limitations in terms of the, data and data access as well.
You're quite right, Don. So let me share a story with you, and perhaps that'll clarify how many challenges are there, but how do you overcome them? So this story begins with actually two pharmaceutical companies, one from the US and one from Japan, who were one of them was starting a clinical trial to treat cancer patients with cachexia, which is a form of muscle loss in cancer patients. And the other one was launching a new therapy on the market to treat the same class of patients. And just to give you a sense, cachexia is common across cancer patients. By some estimates, 80% of cancer patients are found to be cachectic, but it is terribly underdiagnosed in 90% of such patients. So it's a big problem. And but so from a pharmaceutical company standpoint, who are starting a clinical trial or launching a new therapy, as was the case with these two pharmas, how do you find and connect to such patients? Now, you can imagine the pharma companies can do a lot of AI. They have the wherewithal to do that because AI is a means to an end, and they could build their own artificial intelligence models to try and find such patients based on symptomology, using things like natural language processing, or try to find these patients based on inclusion exclusion criteria using keywords and so on and so forth. But the challenge is, even if they build their AI models, they cannot pay healthcare providers to deploy those AI models. Regulation prohibits it for several reasons. Equally, healthcare providers who are managing data for such patients can do similarly their own AI, right? And mind you, the healthcare providers are very motivated to do this because they, of course, want to treat these patients and improve their outcomes, as we were discussing earlier. But their challenge is, where are they going to find the budget to do this, right? Uh, and even if they do find the budget by virtue of grants or their own internal resources, how are they going to connect with pharmaceutical companies to do this at scale? Because then
Right.
that would mean, as a healthcare provider, they would have to go to each of the pharma companies and set up ad hoc projects, which for the pharma companies is a bigger problem because then they will have to set up a contract or a project with each healthcare provider just to make sure that there is an apples to apples study. And it's not something that you're doing, even if it's in the same disease area with one healthcare provider, your parameters are different to working on a different project with a different healthcare provider, right? So this was a real challenge. So Pangea came to the party, and in collaboration with the National Health Service in the UK, we started a project where the oncologists in the UK were highly motivated to do this work, as I described earlier, because they wanted to find this large proportion of undiagnosed patients. And they gave us a data set of 8,000 cancer patients. And when I say they gave us the data set or access to this data set, this meant that we never got to see the data set or touch it. We simply gave them our product platform and they deployed it behind their firewall on their data to get a readout by characterizing all those 8,000 cancer patients for cachexia and finding how many of them were undiagnosed. So as they discovered, if they had been using traditional approaches like looking for these patients based on ICD codes, which are essentially billing codes, or looking for these patients based on just symptoms that are associated with cachexia, which can be common across multiple other conditions, they would have found only 60 odd patients in this particular data set. However, when they used Pangea, they were finding close to 360 or 400 patients
Hmm.
who were all clinically validated by clinicians because it was the first project. They wanted to know if the product was doing what it was supposed to do. What that meant was that there were 6 times more undiagnosed and miscoded patients in the very same data set who were hidden in plain sight. And now they were able to schedule these patients in for clinical review and take them through the normal clinical workflow of connecting them with a nutritionist and treating them. What it meant for the pharmaceutical companies who were sponsoring the project was, of course, for the clinical one running a clinical trial, now there was a 6 times larger pool of patients
Yeah.
who they could, at least bring onto the trial. And for the one who were launching a new therapy, that meant 6 times more revenue, potentially. Now, let me put things in perspective. What do we mean this was a small data set? Now you scale this across the UK, and the oncologists have said this could potentially lead to the discovery of 200,000 new patients annually, right? That's a big number. So now they actually have empirical evidence to suggest how many more patients could be found, and therefore how many more nutritionists or resources they need within a public healthcare system like the NHS. But equally, they were able to show how in the patients that were being found, they were able to halve the cost of treatment from 10,000 to 5,000 pounds in each patient, which in the context of 200,000 patients means about £1 billion in savings alone, right? Just for
Amazing.
one disease.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So now you can see how all of this starts having a snowball effect where the healthcare providers are motivated because they know that without sharing their data or working around de-identifying the data or giving access to the data, they're able to benefit from intelligence within the data by applying a product like Pangea to treat more patients who are falling through the net. You can see how the patients benefit by being treated and receiving the care that they deserve, and then the pharmaceutical companies benefiting because they only care about the metrics and making sure that the patients benefit from the therapies and trials, and they are not interested in the data anyway about the patients or identifiable data, as we say. And this of course helps them also with new insights about these patients. So for example, in the study, the oncologists were finding that cirrhosis was a new insight that was related to cachectic patients, which they know from a research perspective is important because muscle loss in cancer patients is seen to be correlated at least in some way to liver malfunction. They don't know if it's causative or it's correlated. Just so it's a research topic. But the fact that the data found that and gave that new insight was very interesting for both pharma and clinical researchers. So hopefully you see how in a financially sustainable manner and in a repeatable manner, all the pharma and the healthcare providers were able to work together in the interest of patients, and how they're able to scale this up not just for one condition, but all the other hard to diagnose conditions, which are about 7,000 of them, and collaborate.
Yeah. I mean, I the next question I have for you is, um, outside of the NHS, I mean, are you also seeing more global companies, wanting to get involved, going forward as well with Pangea and the work that you're doing?
We are indeed, yes. So we've had pharmaceutical. So most of our business is in the US, with some in the UK, and in America, we are finding, for example, pharmaceutical companies sponsoring Pangea to find more undiagnosed and miscoded patients across very specific hard to diagnose conditions. For example, we recently completed a project around COPD and chronic kidney disease, CKD, again, where a large portion of patients, almost 90%, are underdiagnosed.
Mm.
And here, in the first phase of our work, we showed how, working with a data set of about 60,000 patient records, we were able to find 5 to 6 times more COPD patients at high risk of exacerbation, and again, about 20 times more patients at risk of chronic kidney disease. And this was amazing for the pharmaceutical company because they know that if more patients can be found like this and brought at least for screening or into the treatment care pathway, then inevitably this would mean that more patients are being treated and being cared for, and leading to improved outcomes. And the same motivation stands for the healthcare providers. So we are seeing this happen. And of course, these empirical evidences, you see, because you have to go beyond concept and produce evidence clinically, which is clinically proven. And now that we have that, that is motivating practicing clinicians to do the same work. Because now you're saying to them, look, this is the art of the possible, and this is something that you can do without having to foot the bill for it and without having to transact data, which are two of their biggest concerns
Right.
because they're busy as it is, right? So if you're saying to them, you don't have to pay for it and you don't have to worry about privacy regulations, and more importantly, you don't have to change anything that you're doing in routine clinical practice, but you're simply at your fingertips, you're getting a short list of patients who should be brought into clinical care, and you can directly schedule them for reviews or screening. uh, that is, of course, music to their ears, as we are finding as well. So we are doing this work across the US, across some of the largest health systems, and which is frankly quite fulfilling because while I've been talking to you about the implementation aspects of all of this, you should hear some of the stories directly from the patients of how it's actually impacted their lives very positively and in a very meaningful way. Um,
Yeah, I mean, so many times, right? I mean, you hear stories as well of patients that, you know, they know that they have a problem, and they routinely go to see their healthcare provider, and that problem, you know, for whatever reason, either doesn't seem to have a treatment, or, you know, isn't something that the healthcare provider sees, either in the information that they have, and so it is absolutely critical work, and I can hear that coming through in everything that you're saying as well.
you're quite right, Don. Let me share with you two examples of this. Working in lung and ovarian cancer, there was a large trial for screening patients using liquid biopsy tests. And this was sponsored by pharmaceutical companies in collaboration with the large health systems. And they wanted to demonstrate how liquid biopsy tests could help screen patients for across 50 different types of cancers. But of course, and you can imagine the motivation for pharma and healthcare providers were pretty obvious, right? Like they wanted to treat more patients and find patients, for earlier, right, before their conditions worsen. And that's what we've been talking about. But actually, when we got part of the study, we were finding 3 to 4 times more patients in the very same data sets who were diagnosed properly, but were not being brought in for screening, meaning they were being missed for screening just because they were miscoded.
Hmm.
Now, imagine for those patients, this was a boon because if they could be found and brought in for screening and then be taken to the care pathway before their stage of cancer progresses any further, this made a serious impact on their life and their families, right? And the fact that we were not finding 10 or 20% more, actually 3 to 4 times more, was quite significant. In another study in lupus, I actually was talking to somebody who said, their brother was suffering from lupus and actually lupus nephritis, and for the longest time was undiagnosed. And we know this is a big problem in lupus. 1 in 5 patients are undiagnosed in lupus. And the proportion of these undiagnosed patients with lupus nephritis is even higher. I think it's about 70%, if I'm right from memory. So their own brother was going through this, had gone through multiple tests. This was in the US, in primary and secondary care, gone through multiple different prescriptions, but lupus was not being diagnosed. And the impression in the mind of course, this person I was interacting with were the physicians incompetent, and they were not able to find what was wrong, right? But actually, if you look at their data, which is what somebody did, a clinician actually looked at their data and their record, and they instantly said, once they spend about 40 minutes on looking at the record, which, mind you, is not typical. Physicians in real practice would not have that much time. They figured, oh, the patient should be screened for lupus. And when they were, it turned out that they, of course, were suffering from this terrible disease. The point being, and then they could be put onto the trial, for which they were relevant for because the disease had progressed to a certain stage. The point being that the information is there, right? So if you talk to patients and and you talk to them about stories which help them, or talk to them about capabilities which can help discovery of these undiagnosed aspects, which can actually help improve the patient lives, that has a serious impact on their lives. And I just wanted to share those two examples where, just due to administrative miscoding or for whatever reason, of another case of undiagnosis, but being turned around in both, how it made a very positive difference in the patient lives. And we have countless other such stories.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And so I wanted to focus a little bit more on you and your growth overall as a leader. What's some of the best leadership advice that you've ever received?
Focus on customer success. And that is one of the best advice I received way back. And when I talk about customer success, it's not just delivering a software product for your customers, which meets the scope of requirements and does what it says on the tin. but actually demonstrates value and helps them reflect or demonstrates that value to their peers. That is very, very important. And there's a subtle difference between the two. Anybody can deliver a software solution, or a service. In our case, it's a product. But how can you show success to your end users to the point that they are able to talk about that success and that value to their peers and to other people in their network? That is very key. And this is where I always relate this back to stories of patients. So imagine a pharma company who's sponsoring your product is able to actually talk about how patients' lives were improved by deploying Pangea and finding these patients and connecting them with their therapies and trials. Can clinicians in healthcare talk about how they have used Pangea to treat more patients and improve their lives and actually get patient testimonials? And yes, that has been true, and that is quite fulfilling. So focusing on customer success is very, very important, because that from there you can lead on to knowing who your customers are and who your most beneficiaries are. So yes, our customers are always pharmaceuticals companies and of course healthcare providers, but actually our beneficiaries are patients, right?
Right.
Which is
Right.
what is critical for everyone who's working with. So knowing that is very, very important. And once you have that focus, I think you will stay the course,
Yeah.
even though there are challenges.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a lot of benefit to focusing on that who's the last stage beneficiary as well. What inspires you?
Uh, Very simply, it's those patient stories. I mean, this is real as it gets. You only have to be in the clinic and talk to patients and understand how things we might think are trivial or process related or whatnot, but how significantly they impact their lives. uh, you know and the fact, if using technology, which is a means to an end, or using science, or a combination of the two, as we are, if you can make even a little difference in that, that has a huge impact. I
Mm,
mean, I did share those stories with you. I mean, we talk about cost savings, and we talk about efficiencies in pharma and in healthcare, and all of that is true, and that's important to build a business case, right?
right.
uh, but all of this translates in the real world with real impact on people, and that's what motivates us. And I've, like I said, I've got countless stories. One of my favorite, and I promise I wouldn't take too much of your time, came from a dinner conversation. And I always say this to my colleagues: when you're around a dinner table, how would you explain Pangea, right, and the work you're doing, in comparison to others who might be doing other cool stuff in other walks of life? And this actually is very much a real story, because from personal experience, I was actually at such a dinner, and I just shared about what Pangea was doing by being able to find more undiagnosed patients and help them along the care pathway. And at that dinner, along with my friend, their parents were present, and elderly senior citizens. And all they had to say was that, "We bless you. We really want you to do well, not financially, but we genuinely want you to do well, because this is good for society and this will really help us." And the backstory was that they actually had some people in their family who had been undiagnosed for the longest time for several diseases, as a result of which, they had been impacted quite severely. So those are the stories that gives you the goosebumps and keep you motivated and brings all of this to life.
Very good. What concerns you?
I think from the perspective of how we are using technology today, along with clinical data, one of the things, of course, you're always wanting to do is scale,
Mm,
right? And if you want to scale effectively as a business, yes, you can do that in a B2B fashion, which is what we are doing, where you sell to businesses who would pay for it, right? Because let's be honest, you do need somebody to sponsor it, and because, back to our earlier point, to make it financially sustainable. But at the same time, if you're talking about scalability, you ought to get this technology in the hands of everyone, right? And at that point, how do you make that transition, and how do you get the technology from a B2B perspective, from a B2B standpoint, to a B2C, where it's directly in the hands of the consumers, and it can help the consumers at the point of care, or actually to help them get to the point of care. That is fascinating, and it's not particularly a concern, but it's a very interesting and exciting challenge. That's what motivates us, and that's where we're going with this.
Very good. Last question. What excites you?
It's this aspect of being able to help patients and help improve their outcomes is what's exciting at an emotional level, at a technological level. All the advancements that we're seeing in large language models, with the GPT-4 and several other large aspects, are very exciting. My co-founder, Professor Guo, he's a leading light in this domain, has been working in the industry for about 30 years. And we're doing some phenomenal things from a technical standpoint, which, if you marry with the creativity that science offers, has huge potentials. I mean, you're really looking into the future where patients are not just interacting with a chatbot to understand based on their symptoms what they should be doing, but they're actually interacting with a system like Pangea, which is helping them through their journey, and that is super fascinating.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Vibhor Gupta, um, thank you so much for joining me today on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here and for telling me about Pangea and the work that you're doing. It sounds very exciting, and I know that there's even better things to come for the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Don, for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.